Welcome back to All Sorts Podcast, everyone. I'm really excited for today's deep dive. We want exploring all sorts of fascinating topics here, and we've got a really intriguing one lined up. If you're new to All Sorts, welcome aboard. Our YouTube channel is like a treasure chest of knowledge just waiting to be unlocked, so make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on future deep dives. And for those of you who've been with us on this journey, you know the drill, like, share, and spread the knowledge. And don't forget to join our awesome community on X, Instagram, and Threads, where we keep the conversation going beyond these deep dives. It's amazing to see how many of you are as captivated by these topics as we are. In fact, today's topic came straight from you, our listeners. You shared some really interesting articles and research about a topic that's always sparked curiosity and debate, eidetic and photographic memory.
Yeah, I've got to say, these concepts have always been fascinating to me, too. They seem almost like superpowers, right? Being able to remember everything you see in perfect detail.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack these ideas, separate the science from the myths, and really explore how these relate to the way we all remember things. And a big thank you to all of you who send in those articles and research papers. We've got a great mix of perspectives to draw from. So let's get started. We'll begin with eidetic memory. What exactly are we talking about when we use that term?
So eidetic memory, sometimes called didactic memory, is basically the ability to recall an image, a visual image, with incredible detail after seeing it for just a short time. It's also often referred to as photographic memory, although, as we'll get into, that term can be a little misleading.
Right, and I remember from some of the research that one of the key things about eidetic memory is that it's not long-lasting. Right, it's like a fleeting mental image.
Exactly. It's kind of like taking a super detailed mental snapshot that fades quickly, usually within a few minutes.
So can you give us some examples of what this might look like in practice? I mean, how would someone with eidetic memory demonstrate that ability?
Absolutely. Imagine a child looking at a really detailed picture, something with lots of elements, for, say, 30 seconds. A child with eidetic memory might be able to close their eyes and describe that picture in amazing detail, almost as if they were still looking at it. They could tell you specific colors, the number of objects in the picture, even the way they were arranged. One of the studies someone sent in actually mentioned a case where a child was briefly shown a page full of words in a foreign language, and they were able to read some of those words from their mental image. Pretty incredible, huh?
That's wild. I think a lot of us might have experienced something vaguely similar, though much less impressive, like when you catch a glimpse of someone's outfit and later you can picture the pattern on their shirt or the color of their shoes.
Right, though in those cases it's probably more general visual memory at play, not true eidetic memory. But you bring up a good point. What's even more interesting is that many people described as eidikers report seeing a really vivid after image, almost like the picture's still projected in front of them even after it's gone. And sometimes they'll even move their eyes as if they're scanning that mental image.
That's fascinating. Now, something else that stood out from the research is that this ability seems to be more common in children. Is that right? And if so, why might that be?
Yeah, you're right. That does seem to be the case. Estimates vary, but research suggests that a significant percentage of young children, maybe something like 2 to 15% between the ages of 6 and 12, show signs of eidetic memory. But as they grow older, this ability often fades. And there are a few theories about why this happens. One idea is that as kids develop language and other more complex ways of thinking and remembering, they rely less on purely visual memory. It's like their brains shift gears and find more efficient ways to store and retrieve information.
So it's almost as if once language takes over as the primary way we process information, that visual snapshot becomes less essential.
Yeah, something like that. It's also important to note that eidetic memory seems to be a very short-term type of memory, lasting seconds rather than minutes. It's thought that visual input goes into this eidetic memory for a very short time, and then it's either discarded or moves into regular short-term memory, but usually not as a photographic image, more as an understanding of what was seen. One of the research papers you sent over even pinpointed a specific part of the brain that's thought to be involved in this process, the posterior parietal cortex. It acts like a temporary visual sketch pad, holding on to those visual details before they either fade or get processed further.
Okay, so that gives us a good handle on eidetic memory, at least as much as science understands it right now. But now let's turn to the term that I think causes even more confusion and intrigue: photographic memory. What is that supposed to be, according to what we've learned?
Well, photographic memory takes the idea of visual recall to a whole other level. It's this idea that someone can remember visual information with perfect accuracy and incredible detail over long periods. We're talking days, weeks, even years after seeing something just once. It's like having a mental photograph that never fades and that you can pull up on demand.
So if someone had true photographic memory, what would they be capable of? I'm thinking of those almost mythical examples we sometimes hear about.
Imagine someone looking at a whole page of text or numbers just once and being able to recite it perfectly even years later. Or picture someone glancing at a detailed map and then days later being able to draw it from memory with every street and landmark in place. That's the kind of extraordinary ability that people often associate with photographic memory.
That does sound pretty extraordinary, almost superhuman. But I also remember from the research that there's a lot of skepticism in the scientific community about whether this actually exists.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Despite how captivating the idea is, true photographic memory, in the sense of perfect, long-lasting visual recall, has never been scientifically proven. In fact, a lot of the research we looked at suggests that it might be more myth than reality.
So if it's not real, how do scientists explain the cases where people seem to have these incredible memory abilities?
One of the key arguments against photographic memory is that it just doesn't fit with how we understand memory to work. You see, memory isn't like a video recorder that captures everything perfectly. It's much more of a reconstructive process. When we remember something, our brains piece it back together, and this process is influenced by all sorts of things: our interpretations, the context in which we learn the information, our emotions at the time. So remembering isn't like replaying a recording. It's more like creating a new version each time based on the pieces we have. Also, our brains are wired for efficiency. They prioritize information that seems important and discard what seems less relevant. If we tried to store perfect copies of everything we see, it would overload our systems.
That makes sense. So when people do display exceptional memory, what's the explanation?
It's likely a combination of factors. Some people simply have a knack for remembering visual details. But more often than not, people with impressive memory skills are using learned techniques or cognitive strategies to enhance their recall.
Oh, interesting. So what are some of these techniques?
Well, one common strategy is association, where you connect new information to things you already know. Another is chunking, where you break down large amounts of information into smaller, more manageable bits. And then there are mnemonics, which are memory aids like rhymes or acronyms. Some sources mention the military method, which uses a technique of exposing oneself to information in alternating light and dark conditions. But the evidence for that is mostly anecdotal. And of course, things like focus and attention play a huge role. When you really concentrate on something, you're more likely to remember it. Some of the articles also mention practicing visual recall, like trying to remember details of objects you see every day.
So it's more about training your brain to be a better memorizer, not about having some innate photographic ability.
Exactly. Even those memory champions who can perform amazing feats of recall don't claim to have photographic memory. They rely on dedicated practice and clever strategies. It's more about honing your memory skills than having some superpower.
Okay, so we've talked about eidetic memory and photographic memory. It seems like understanding the difference between the two is really important. Can we recap the key distinctions based on all the material we've covered?
Absolutely. One of the biggest differences is the time frame involved. Eidetic memory is very short-lived, lasting just a few minutes at most. Photographic memory, as it's popularly understood, is supposed to be long-term, allowing recall over days, weeks, or even years. Another key difference is the level of scientific support. There's at least some evidence for eidetic memory, mainly in children, though it's not a perfect photographic representation. But true photographic memory, that long-term, flawless visual recall, just doesn't have solid scientific backing. And finally, the way people describe their experience of recall seems to differ. People with eidetic memory talk about seeing a vivid image in their mind's eye, almost like it's projected externally. Those with exceptional memory, but not photographic memory, might just recall details accurately without necessarily having that same intense visual experience. So, to put it simply, eidetic memory is about briefly holding onto a detailed mental image, while photographic memory is about recalling visual information accurately over a long time without necessarily seeing that image.
That's a really helpful way to put it. Now, let's touch on the skepticism surrounding these concepts, especially photographic memory. A lot of the research you sent was pretty critical. What were some of the main points of contention?
There's a lot of skepticism about both eidetic and photographic memory, but particularly about photographic memory in adults. You might have heard of the famous case of Elizabeth, who was studied by a researcher named Charles Strohmeyer. She was presented as having this unique ability to combine random dot patterns seen days apart to create a 3D image. Some people pointed to this as evidence of photographic memory. However, as some of the critiques you shared pointed out, the methodology of those studies has been questioned, and the fact that the researcher later married Elizabeth raises some red flags about potential bias. Also, those results have never been replicated by other researchers, and Elizabeth has apparently refused further testing, which understandably leads to more skepticism. Big names in cognitive science, like Marvin Minsky, have even called photographic memory an unfounded myth. Another point to remember is that even with eidetic memory, recall isn't always perfect. Eidetickers often make small errors, sometimes even adding details that weren't there originally, which suggests that even their short-term visual memory involves some reconstruction. A researcher named Brian Deving reviewed a lot of the research and concluded that there's simply not enough solid evidence for eidetic memory in adults, let alone photographic memory. What we often see in adults with exceptional memory is more likely due to highly developed mnemonic techniques like those used by memory athletes, or conditions like hyperthymesia, which is an incredible ability to remember personal life events but not necessarily other visual information.
It's fascinating how much our understanding of memory has evolved. So, since true eidetic or photographic memory seems unlikely, what can we do to improve our everyday memory? I think that's something all of us would be interested in.
Oh, absolutely. While we might not be able to develop a mythical photographic memory, there are plenty of practical, evidence-based strategies to make our memories sharper. One key takeaway is to keep your mind active. Engaging in brain games, puzzles, and learning new things can help keep your cognitive functions in tip-top shape. A lot of the research emphasized the power of association, linking new information to things you already know, or creating vivid mental pictures to connect ideas. Chunking, breaking down information into smaller pieces, was also mentioned as a really effective technique. Some of the articles also suggested practicing visual recall, like trying to remember details of everyday objects or playing memory games. And of course, basic things like focus and attention are crucial. When you're really focused on something, you're much more likely to remember it. There were even a few sources that talked about how diet can play a role in brain health and memory. Things like omega-3 fatty acids, moderate caffeine intake, choline found in egg yolks, and antioxidants from fruits and vegetables were all linked to potential cognitive benefits.
Those are all great tips. So it's really about actively working on your memory, not just hoping for some magical photographic ability.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and using strategies that work. Consistent effort, using helpful memory tools, practicing visualization, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle can make a big difference.
So to wrap up our deep dive, can we just quickly summarize the key points we've covered, especially as they relate to the questions you, our listeners, sent in?
Definitely. Based on all the material we've looked at, the main takeaway is that eidetic memory, that short-lived, detailed visual recall, is something that's primarily observed in childhood, while photographic memory, the idea of perfect, long-term visual recall, remains scientifically unproven. The good news is that even without those extraordinary abilities, our everyday memory is pretty amazing, and there's a lot we can do to enhance it through various techniques and healthy habits.
Absolutely. And on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. In today's world, we rely so much on our digital devices to store and retrieve information, even visual information. How might this be impacting our natural visual memory abilities? Is it possible that our reliance on external memory aids is changing the way we learn and remember in the long run? It's a really interesting question to consider. And with that food for thought, we come to the end of our deep dive here at All Sorts Podcast. But remember, your journey of discovery doesn't have to end here. Head over to our All Sorts Podcast YouTube channel, where a whole universe of fascinating topics awaits. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to keep the knowledge flowing. And don't forget to dive into our archive of past deep dives. There's so much to explore. And to connect with our amazing community, join us on X, Instagram, and Threads, where ideas spark and understanding takes flight. Your engagement is what keeps us going, so keep those minds curious. Until next time.